Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. I am Radha Gopalan, your host for the webinar today, and one of the editors at I Wonder. Now, for those of you who are joining us for the first time, I Wonder is an Azim Premji University publication for middle school science teachers, and the magazine is available free of cost in English, Hindi, and Kannada. Joining us today is Santosh Kumar, who teaches EVS and land care to middle school students at the Valley School in Bangalore. Santosh is very passionate about growing food in ways that rejuvenate soil and landscapes. He's especially interested in working with children to tend and care for the land. Santosh, thank you for joining us. And
Welcome.
today, Santosh and I, we will explore teaching the topic of soil in middle school science classrooms. And we'll do this by discussing two articles from the August 2018 issue of I Wonder. The first one, Learning About Soil, Students' Voices, was written by Santosh. And I've written the other article, Getting to the Soul of Soil. Now, we invite all of you who've joined us live today to participate in our conversation through your comments and questions. So please type them in the chat box and we will try and weave it into our conversation. So I think we're ready to go ahead with our conversation now. So Santosh, we'll begin. Okay. So first thing, Santosh, you wrote in the article that most children experience soil through play, right? Or through smell or songs. And for children who come from agricultural communities, soil is part of their everyday life, right? And you also mentioned that they have a natural relationship, no? There's another thing that you also point out that their perspective of soil is very different from how it's presented in their textbooks. So could you elaborate on that? Maybe we could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
I mean, when if you look at the past interactions that we have had with children, especially from the rural milieu background, it appears that for them it's like they when you take them out to work in soil, it's like they take to it like fish to water.
Mhm.
Soil is so much an integral part of their lives, as compared to their urban counterparts. Because they cultivate food crops. The day begins with maybe cleaning the cattle shed, tying the animals out, cleaning the sheep shed, leave the chicken, and take all the swept biomass and cow dung mixed to the nearest compost pit, and so on.
Right.
So it's a their life in a way is rooted in things
Yeah.
connected to the soil, and it's a
Right.
very natural relationship. So
Right.
um, they have a better connect to the concept of certain topics in biology. For example, plant biology, seed germination, if you can say, they will grasp the topic much better, and they have a better connect to that than their urban counterparts maybe. And
Mm.
and it's fascinating for them when you teach them about photosynthesis and so on, because that part of the
Mm.
plant biology is not something that they know about, so it's something new, and they are
Correct.
very keen to learn
Right.
that. So,
Right.
and when you say that, for example, that there's a lot that happens above the soil that you see, but there is so much happening underneath in the soil, within the soil itself, which is um, most of them find it very interesting, fascinating. Yeah,
And also,
that's true.
one of the things you and I have discussed before also that the textbooks, like for example, social science textbook or the science textbook, often, particularly at the lower grades, right? Many times they talk
Yeah.
about soil, soil properties, soil texture, and in fact, it was very interesting that in one of the, in one of the NCRT textbooks, I think it was the previous version, 2023, 2024, grade 6, I think, they talk about
Mhm.
soil as abiotic. So it's very interesting
Uh,
because when the textbook says that it's abiotic, but the children's own experience of soil is very different. It's like life giving, right?
Correct.
So in that
Yeah.
sense, also perspectives are so it's quite fascinating. But there was something very interesting about your approach, Santosh, that you wrote in your article. Normally what happens is teachers, I mean, we know this, right? Teachers, we either take guidance from curriculum or from the prescribed textbooks, right? In order to develop
Correct.
lessons
Yeah.
and lesson. But you took a very different approach, right? You had a dialogue with grade 7 and grade 8 students on what they wanted to
Yeah.
learn about soil and how they wanted to learn it. And then you use their response to guide your pedagogy. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about why you
True.
chose
Yeah.
that approach. No, that would be interesting, and how you went about it. If you could share that, would be really nice. Yeah, yeah.
Uh, Actually, unlike other subjects, when it comes to teaching something connected to soil, um, of course, we are not saying we should do away with the textbook or that we shouldn't follow the curriculum to the dot or however. But the thing is, because it is soil and it is something connected to life per se, and also because it is connected to soil is the very base on which we all exist. So it's a very special subject. By taking into consideration what they think about how it should be done. So there was the interaction was planned in a way because I had one or two questions, but when we started off, children were so enthusiastic, so it took its own direction. But overall, a sense that you got was that students would probably want it to be taught in a much more, what do you say, live, meaningful way than the dry flow of what happens in a textbook, and would want hands-on activities, would want I know, like they were saying, like, some of them remembered poems that, like, we were talking about Kabir's poem Mati Kahe, for example. And also the Telugu students talked about Ma Palle Palinchu Vanadeuda, the song inviting rain and saying,
Mm,
please come in our direction because our uh, crops are dying, and so on and so forth. So
mm,
so it gives us ideas that you should probably make soil learning very connected uh,
mm,
in a real way to them, so
very
that
true.
it's probably, it should be more what do you say, outdoor and activity based, not saying we should move away from the blackboard altogether, not that, but that it should be probably enriched with yeah, certain
Mm,
practical activities. It could even be listening to Kabir's song Mati Kahe, actually.
mm,
Yeah.
mm. No, that's
So
beautiful.
that's what.
Yeah, and also I
Yeah.
think you. I mean, it's interesting what you said. No, that you started it off as a way to engage them. Just with one or two questions, but then
Yeah.
they got so involved in it. So in a sense, your approach
Actually,
almost grew out of grew organically out of this conversation, right? Yeah, and you actually touched
organically
upon,
out of it. Yes. Yeah.
yeah, you touched upon something when you were answering just now, that students, that it's important for us as teachers to really engage them in a more meaningful and live sort of way. So how differently do you think children would learn and relate to soil when they sort of collaborate with you as a teacher to design, like in your case you designed your lesson plan
Mhm.
after listening to them to some extent, right? And so I was just wondering, how differently do you think students would relate to soil when they learn in this way, when they are participating and collaborating with you?
Correct.
Yeah,
So
so mm,
actually, experience. The thing is that even children from urban, kind of rich, middle class, upper middle class background, especially of the age, the class 5, 6, 7, the middle school, so-called middle school, about working with soil. They, I was wrong. I assumed that they would probably have hesitancy in handling manure in some of the gardening activities that we did, or they would have, you know, this thing about touching cow dung or handling tools and so on. But that is something that they don't do. Have that what do you say? When you work with the soil, and so
It came
um,
quite naturally to them, huh?
so
It came.
it came quite naturally to them. It came quite naturally to them, and when we actually, like, you remember the composting experiment, right? This the humus composting, where they had to put a stick in and so on. So when it is actually relatable, and they can actually see a concept being explained, those composting, why the importance of mulching and all, are better explained. Certain techniques which you use in gardening are better learned actually when they do it things practically.
Mm,
um, so actually, one experiment that I can recall is when we were teaching plant reproduction. We had to look at how the pollen gets transferred from the anther to the stigma, and all the details of it, and how pollination happens and what happens with the. So it's very easy to even show a video. Actually, now you have all the audiovisual aids that we can use, but nothing can beat. For a child to actually look at a flower and look at the parts, and to go looking for a flower, you'll have to, they're not children who are very adept at finer dissection and all that, so you'll have to find a bigger flower size where they can easily take things apart and look at the thing. So for example, in our case, we took spathodia, that African tulip flower, and there was and I could, because there are trees in the campus, I could get one flower for each, more than one flower for each of the kids, and they were so fascinated to actually see that there is something called the anther stigma, and there is an ovum, and there are pollen. And then it went off to ecological lessons. It went in a tangential way, so we had to talk about bees, wasps, butterflies, the connections, and why bees are important, and why they are saying that if you lose the bees, you will lose everything, life is lost. So such statements also came in. So it went off in a tangents, but it was a very holistic package for them. Yeah,
mm. That's
that was
beautiful,
one.
actually.
Then more, second,
Yeah.
yeah. And then the other thing that we see is, of course, when you grow and when they get to harvest sweet potato, or which is under the ground, you don't get to see it till you harvest. Whereas other crops, they're above the ground and they see it happening, and that's that sense of thrill and in getting things out and collecting their collection and then taking it to the dining hall and giving it and all. They carried it all the way to. It was about 30 kgs of sweet potato that they harvested. So yes, it's a sensory
Mm,
experience, and like how our friend Suresh Jones was saying, for example, that when your the nerve endings in your fingers, when they
mm,
work with soil and with different textures,
mm,
that
mm,
actually fires certain synapse connections in the brain. So there's supposed to be a
mm.
direct correlation with that. So you're also contributing to all-round brain development of the child
Oh, yeah.
indirectly, perhaps. Yeah.
True, true, true. No, no,
So
very
that comes
interesting.
to my mind.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In fact, when you said about, that you collaborated with them, they designed something. I mean, you designed based on it, but the lesson plan also grew as you were doing the work, which is also dynamic changes. And so the
Like,
next,
that finding out the interconnectedness of all life, when you started
yeah,
talking about bees, wasps, and the connection between
yeah,
pollination and
yeah, yeah,
insects and birds, and yeah,
yeah.
fascinating. Yeah.
It's fascinating. And also, as a teacher, I'm just thinking, for people like you and me, and for all the teachers who are a part of our audience, it's also very interesting when it
Yeah.
becomes a collaborative process, not just through the dialogue in the beginning, But like you were saying, when you started actually doing, running the lesson also, so much seemed to come out of something like this, as opposed to just taking from the textbook and saying, okay, today we are going to do reproduction in plants, but tomorrow we'll do pollination. But
Correct.
pollination emerged for you from the
Yeah.
conversation. That's so you're learning science in a
Yeah,
very,
exactly.
yeah, and they relate to soil also so differently, as you said about, the sweet potato. That was quite wonderful. Yeah. And so you
Yeah.
mentioned earlier
Mm.
that it's not like we should do away with the textbook and curricula, but basically what you have done is you have worked within the curricula and the textbook, but you've just used a different way to begin the engagement with the students, no, through the dialogue, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. It's not that
No?
curriculum is
Yeah.
not important or it should be thrown away.
Correct,
In
correct,
fact,
correct.
NCERT is quite good. For children, it's
Yes,
quite
yes, the
a
textbooks
package,
are
nice
very
package.
quite. Yeah.
Yeah.
In fact, one of the things that as part of the like arising from your dialogue, you had a whole bunch of activities that you suggested that teachers could do, and you just alluded to it just now about the
Mm.
sensory experiences. That they can trigger very powerful learning experience, a
Mm.
sensory experience, right? So when you're learning
Correct.
science at the middle school, you actually did share a couple of examples of how the sensory experience can sort of what should I call it, contribute to learning science. No, so can you think of any other sort of examples
Mm.
that you might have at the middle school level where you used a sensory experience to which gave another powerful learning experience? I think the sweet, yeah, the
Actually,
sweet potato.
when they,
Yeah,
yeah.
sorry.
So it's quite interesting. Like when they come to prepare a bed, raised bed, or when they're digging a pit, they get. They're not just listening to you actually, in being children. So when you say dig a pit, they're digging and they'll come across interesting stones and interesting pieces of wood, which they say when we say there is moisture in the soil, they will ask what do you mean by there is moisture in the soil and why you don't need to water it. Why watering is done in within in a periodic way and not haphazardly. And
Yeah.
sensory experience, of course, the famous one is what was that? Lemongrass. It was grown on the bunch, and one child accidentally happened to cut a leaf and got a cut also on the finger. So, because it's the edges are sharp, like sugarcane and certain grasses have this sharp edges, serration, and it got cut. So then we had to pacify the child, so it was classified. So then we said, look, well, just crush this and you smell it. So then she was like, oh, not only cuts, but it's got smell as well. And then we said it can be used in various ways. There are Ayurveda uses, and you can make tea, flavor your tea, and all that. And of course, the most fascinating thing is when they see uh, the yields, the fruits forming, like chili was
Mm,
forming, then
mm,
coriander, then lady's finger, tomato. So it's an on-field experience. I don't know how to put them into words, but yeah, they
yeah.
are very thrilled, and they all want
Oh,
to
yeah.
taste the chili and see what it
Yeah.
actually raw chili tastes. They wouldn't have done it, so they all want a chili to take home, and they come with this request. Then we have to ask the class teacher whether we can allow them to carry a chili
Mm,
home.
mm,
But also about like how and when we are handling compost and uh, adding it to the plants and digging around the soil, they ask questions like, why do we have to dig the compost in? So then you explain that it's got these all these nutrients and maybe a lot of insect eggs and so on, and compost actually invites more microorganism activity
yeah,
in the soil. Then so in our own way, we try and explain the biogeochemical cycles, know how it happens, the nitrogen cycle. Then they will, we uprooted for class 7, we uprooted. Now there were two stray groundnut plants which had
mm,
come on their own. So we have to show them the nodules of rhizobium.
mm,
So, and how this symbiosis is there. I use that to explain how plants interact with fungi, and most of it is very
correct,
symbiotic. It's a
yes,
complex thing in the soil. So these concepts are explained very well when you're on the field. It's not that again every child listens to this. There are some children which would be very attentive and some won't be. But on the
correct,
whole, it drives home. I mean, it's a very enriching experience for the children.
very
And
true.
there is a majority, like we deal with a group of 10 or 15. So that's also
Mm,
very important. So to divide them into groups, and if in a larger school with a good number of children, 50, 60, it would be
mm,
helpful if 3, 4 teachers are there
yeah, yeah,
to monitor the activity. Otherwise, it becomes very difficult for the teacher. It's quite
correct,
challenging to hold
correct,
their attention. Otherwise,
correct, correct. No,
yeah.
absolutely. Very true.
We
Yeah.
also learned it the hard way. Last year, we used to have the whole section, 30 of them, 28 to 30, and just two of us was very difficult. The children being
Mm,
children, they have so much. And current children attention spans are also not like, I think, our generation. So
mm,
then we suggested halving them. So now this year we have only 15, and we have 3 or 4 teachers around.
okay.
So
Nice.
that's also
Yeah.
important when we do this
Yeah. Yeah.
practical work. Very
True.
crucial, I think.
Very true. Very true. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So I think, Santosh, this might be a good point for us to move on to another extension of the sense of touch and smell and sight. So,
Uh-huh.
so one of the things, you and I have talked about this, that, the article that I had written, right?
Huh.
Uh, I had one of the activities that I had suggested was that students use their sense of touch, smell, sight,
Hmm.
right,
Hmm. Hmm.
and to
You
explore
had,
humus.
yeah,
You
you
know,
had the thing, no, where you worked with the REC children and
the rural
got
children,
them
and
to,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
So,
exactly, yeah.
yeah, actually, and you are better. I think it's better that you answer that question
I
than
will do
me
that.
trying
Yes,
to attempt it. Yeah,
yeah,
about why sensory experience and what's the connection
yeah,
uh, between what you did and the
yeah. I,
agriculture, food production. That's
Yeah,
okay. Yeah.
let's talk a little bit about that. So
Hmm.
one of the things that people have asked me and was about, in fact, some of the teachers asked this, that why humus? Like, why did you focus on humus in that article? So one of the things about humus, of course, and in our conversation, particularly when you and I have collaborated, this is
Hmm.
something that dwelt upon a lot, because humus is really what gives life to soil, right? I mean, that is the life
Hmm.
giving component of soil. So when and particularly for when we talk about middle school children, right?
Hmm.
Children learn about soil, like they learn about all kinds of property. They learn about the properties of soil. They learn about soil's water holding capacity. They learn about the connection to one its ability to retain water, its ability to support life, right? They learn about all this in EVS also, from grade
Hmm.
3 to 5. And then in grade 6 also, in fact, they do activities and they learn this, that leaves fall on the ground, animals decay, and they add nutrients to the soil, right? So
Hmm.
when they are adding nutrients to the when they're adding nutrients to the soil, etc., the question then is that, what does this mean if they're adding nutrients to the soil? That it's an example of recycling in nature, right? So what does it
Hmm.
mean? What is this? What is causing this enrichment of the soil, right? How
You
does
said
this
recycling,
happen?
no?
Yeah, they say
So there
they
was
say
an interesting incident.
yeah,
Not interesting incident. I in fact raised the question. So they were saying
yeah,
they asked why do we add manure? I said we add manure because the plants need nutrients, and that's all there packed in the manure. So
Right.
then I asked, so but we have the wilderness right there, no, in the
Yeah.
school. So,
Yeah.
but nobody manures those trees, nobody does
Yes.
anything to those trees.
Yes.
They're all doing very well. So how
Right.
does that happen? So they were amazed at that question. Then they were like, of course, they don't know the answer. Then I said, those cycles happen naturally there. Agriculture actually is an interruption in those cycles. That's why we have to do so much in terms of adding manure and all, because you want more of a certain product, and that's not how nature operates in the wild. So it's
Right.
different.
Right.
Class seven children understood that.
Class 7, yeah, and also in in the NCRT curriculum in grade 7, I think it's actually in grade 6. They actually have an activity in their textbook, and this is the 2024-2025 new textbook, right? Where they are supposed to investigate different kinds of soils. Okay, and one of the things is that when they're supposed to investigate different kinds of soils, they're also looking at different colors. Why are soils differently colored? Why are some dark? Why are some light? So when children do activities like this, like the ones that were there in my article, for instance, if they're examining humus, it also allows them to connect to this, and they're formally introduced to humus in grade 7 as part of, like you said just now about the forest floor. Like humus is formed in the forest floor. Okay, so they are introduced to humus formally through the mechanism of recycling that we just talked about, degradation of plants and animals in the forest floor. So now, if they are talking about it in the context of the forest floor, how do we bring this their understanding of humus in the forest floor, and how do we extend this understanding to soil? So what is the role of humus in soil? So those kinds of connections to the curriculum can easily be done through
Hmm.
this can easily be done through activities like this. So we can through this one activity of sort of determining humus, identifying humus in soil, students can connect it to various concepts at grade 7 level as well, and later in grade 8 they study about manure and agri-crop production. So once they understand how central humus is to soil fertility, etc., many of these connections can be put in place. And also, there's another thing, I mean, we always talk about, children from rural communities, from agricultural communities. They are very familiar with a lot of these practices, like you said earlier, right? Their life
True.
revolves around this. So, and from their textbooks, when they're learning about humus and they're learning about how humus is formed through degradation of plant and animal material, what happens in the soil? That there is microbial activity that's happening in the soil. As a result of that, humus is formed. So, in grade 8, the textbooks, they separate it into like for instance, chapter 2 is on microorganisms, friend or foe, so on. And then subsequent chapter is on, and then in grade 8, they come to crop production. So when we do these activities, there is learning that allows you to connect across grades also. That when you learn about humus in through this activity, say you do it with grade 7 children or with grade 6 or grade 7 or grade 8 children, particularly when you do it with grade 6 and grade 7 children, you're able to make these connections
Hmm. Hmm.
between what is in their
Absolutely.
textbook about humus in the forest floor to humus in growing food,
In
which
agriculture.
we will come to at a later point.
Hmm.
So one thing that and just just continuing on the in the same vein that you talked about how since we talked about rural communities just now, you mentioned that that students from rural communities, they expressed a very strong mental association between fertility and soil. Now, when
Hmm.
we talk about fertility and soil, it's very central to growing food, right? And you make a very beautiful suggestion in your article, Santosh, where you say that growing food as an activity, right, helps inculcate a sense of respect for hands-on work and for farming as a way of life. So
True.
I'm sure people in our audience would be very interested to know that we're talking about science, right? So why do you think it is important for students to have respect first for hands-on work, right? The second thing is for farming as a way of life. Because when we talk about hands-on work, no, Santosh, when we talk about science and hands-on work, we say that hands-on work is very useful it builds certain skills and dispositions in science learning. No, when we do hands-on activity, you build observation skills, experimentation. You also become resourceful in the way you use materials because you are manipulating materials through experiments. But when you say respect for hands-on work and respect for farming as a way of life, can you share what you were thinking about at that time when you mentioned this? Yeah.
Actually, how much ever you read about producing food or growing vegetables and so on, including how much ever videos you see on YouTube. There are so many now, umpteen number of months, which are good also actually, but nothing can equate or come anywhere close to you doing that yourself. From when I say you, from a child's point of view. Of course, it applies to adults as well, but yeah, child's point of view. So unless you, and it's not that like growing food is that you sow a seed, you water, you provide manure, water at the right times, and it happens. It's not as simple as that, right? So you have to look at soil, the quality of soil, the kind of probably crops that are suitable, the time of sowing, and also at a farmer's level, there are so many challenges that a farmer faces. To simply explain how complicated actually even not complicated, how complex the even the germination of a seed is from a farmer's point of view. For example, like like you, let's say in late July you sow a crop, and then you sow it in furrows, then you cover them, then you come back, and then if there is heavy rain, uh, for let's say a heavy downpour of a few centimeters, where there is for a moment, I mean for a while, water which stagnates in the field, and then it stops raining after that.
Mm.
Very Rayalaseema thing, right?
Mm.
Then what happens is on the top you get a layer of hard silt. It
Mm.
forms. I don't know
Mm.
whether
Mm.
silt is the right word. It is actually
Mm.
finer
Mm.
particles of the soil. They
Mm.
cake up, and if
Mm.
there are no subsequent rains, it doesn't allow germination, the sprout to come out of the soil at all. We have
Mm.
had many failures like that. We
Mm.
had to do resowing,
Right.
right? So that is one complexity that you will not understand unless you do it yourself or you have an experience of it.
True.
Then
True.
the another thing that happens is, so this is one situation where it rains and stops, or if it is continuously raining also, the sprout actually rots and you don't get
Yeah. Yeah.
percentage of germination at all.
Yeah.
So that's
Yeah.
one challenge that you can explain to children, that it
Yeah.
happens. And
Yeah.
then after it starts growing up, you have various other issues. You have diseases,
Yeah.
you have the drought period, dry spells, or a wet spell. Like in paddy, if you remember, in Rishi Valley surroundings,
Mm.
some cyclone or the other would come exactly coinciding with their harvesting season, and the whole crop will it become like a carpet. It will fall down large, and the seeds start germinating in the
Correct.
planting
Correct.
of
Correct.
in the year itself.
Right.
So
Right.
to explain this, I think we should actually even, I don't know, it's just coming to my mind. Probably plan certain activities where the crop would even fail.
Very interesting. Yeah.
To drive home a point that it's not as simple. Food production is not as simple as we
Imagine.
think
Yeah.
it is.
Yeah.
And like we the as part of agricultural science syllabus, they had to grow in Rishi Valley, cultivate a small patch of land and grow certain things. So there were four students. It comes to my mind, and they chose, one chose tomato, other chose potato. Forget what the third one chose. There was one girl who was very keen on growing paddy, and she said she'll grow black, traditional black variety of paddy, and she was very keen, very interested. So of course she received help from all of us in preparing the plot She alone couldn't have managed that, but she herself did the sowing and made sure that she was there when watering was happening and all that. And actually, the crop came up quite well because it was also planted in season
mm,
in
mm,
July, and it was a 5 month crop.
mm,
So
mm,
when the seeds formed, and then
mm.
they were in that stage when they're about to ripen,
Right.
uh, I had kind of hinted to her that you're waiting eagerly. We'll have to wait till we can lay our hands on it, harvest it. Then only you can say the crop is yours.
Yeah.
And there was a weekend, and then the next Monday afternoon, they came to have a look at their plots. And her plot, the paddy saplings were standing, but there were no grains in it. All had
Oh,
been eaten up by rats completely.
oh my.
Not even one grain. So
Yeah.
then, for her, after all that, so she actually sat there and started crying.
Yeah.
And then, I couldn't say that then, but
Yeah.
later on, once her disappointment, she had overcome her disappointment. I spoke to her about how, it's so challenging,
Yeah.
hard for a farmer to actually bring
Yeah.
food to our table. There is so much that is involved, from germination stage to post harvest management of the crop, to be till he takes the crop home and puts it in his storage. There is
Yeah.
no guarantee.
Yeah.
So this was spoken to them because they were already in class 9.
Yeah.
They could understand and connect to that.
Yeah.
So that
Yeah.
was an experience that they all
Yeah.
were exposed to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But
So,
Santosh, I was just thinking when you were talking that
hmm,
for children from agricultural communities also, what happens is, there's such a disconnect and an alienation from their own
their
uh,
own,
everyday
yeah,
life and their
yeah,
not lived experience and what is often seen as a science classroom, right? Because
correct.
you study them differently. Now, in the science textbook, for instance, in the grade 8 textbook, they learn about crop production and management. So it's like
Hmm.
tuck, tuck, sowing,
Yeah,
irrigation,
this
manuring,
happened, then it
etc.
happens.
But I was just thinking when you were talking that for a child for whom this is their lived experience in middle school even, right? To bring it to the classroom and to be able to share in the classroom that look actually in
Yeah,
practice
yeah.
not how it happens. If an opportunity like that is given to children,
Oh, it's
then the
very
other
exciting.
children, yeah, and the other children who don't have that background also begin to appreciate what different knowledge systems bring you. There is lived experience and there is the textbook. So those connections become very, very, very strong. No, in this
Mhm.
context, there was a very interesting thought I had because you asked one question about. I mean, one of the things you said in your article, in fact, was that we should take students to a soil testing lab and get them to interact
Yes.
with scientists and
Mhm.
technicians. Right?
Yeah.
And you and I have worked together, and I think for the purpose of the audience, we should sort of share because we've been referring to each other's work. That Santosh and I actually worked together for almost 8 years in another school, in Rishi Valley School, and we collaborated on a lot of agriculture, food growing related from middle school as well as primary school. So in this context, one of the things that might be useful for or also for our audience to think about, and for teachers particularly, is that when governments are, for instance, state as well as central government are developing soil health cards for farmers, right? So for
Mm.
children, even in middle school, they are studying. So the soil health cards basically talk about the chemistry and the physical properties and the chemical properties of soil, and whether a soil is suitable for cultivation of certain kinds of things or not. If it's not suitable, what should you add? So the purpose of soil health cards is to tell a farmer what is the health of their soil. Now, for children who study in grade 7, they study acids and bases. And in fact, in their textbook, there is a reference to neutralization of soils. They learn in their textbook that, when soil becomes acidic, you add calcium hydroxide. When soil becomes basic, you add manure in order to bring in acidity. Now, one of the things about humus is that when you add soil rich in humus to basic soils, it actually neutralizes the soil in a very interesting way because humus is composed of humic and fulvic acid. So, children then begin to relate the textbook understanding of, say, chemistry, acids and bases. Because when you take them to a soil testing lab, there the scientists and technicians are testing pH, they're testing soil texture, they're testing organic carbon content. nitrogen content, phosphorus content, sulfur content, all of that. The other interesting thing here is that in grade 8, I think, yeah, or grade 7 or grade 8, they also study about microorganisms. So great opportunity for teachers to also, if an activity like this is done, even with whether it's children from urban or rural communities, it also is an opportunity to connect it to things like nitrogen fixing bacteria in soil. That you add fertilizer, which is supposed to bring in nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium to the soil, but then what happens in when you build the humic content of soil, when you build humus in soil, what happens? You actually build the nutritional content of soil. So these kind of connections between what is done in a lab and how it relates to what they learn in a classroom, these are very interesting ways to look at some of these activities that are suggested in both the articles. No, I mean, Santosh, I think that would be sort of
Uh,
interesting for
One
both
thing comes
urban.
to my mind.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Correct me if I'm wrong,
yeah,
if this is correct. So one activity that suddenly came to, I mean, I thought could be done was bring in urea,
yeah,
the diammonium phosphate
yeah,
samples,
yeah.
bring in some humus,
Yeah.
then dissolve it in water and do use a pH paper. I mean, to
Yes.
be an
Yes. Yes.
excellent thing to illustrate how adding humus is different from adding these chemicals directly into soil.
Yes.
Yeah,
Very true.
very
And
good.
the best source of among the really good sources of humus, of course, is compost,
Compost.
which we
Yeah.
talked about earlier. And I
Hmm.
think it would be interesting to go to a conversation about the relationship between humus and food. No, because we're talking
Hmm.
so much about
Hmm.
composting and the role of compost in improving fertility of soil. Would be interesting to also think about how does this relate to food, and you've shared a lot of examples about that. But I was just thinking there was one suggestion that you had, Santosh, in your article. You said
Hmm.
that one way to connect this understanding of compost, humus, and compost is such a rich source of humus, right? Because after all, what is composting?
Yeah.
We are actually the way we commonly compost, whether it's in the farm or
Hmm.
whether it is in your house composting, we are actually mimicking what happens on the forest floor, right? And children learn about the forest floor from their grade 7 textbook. And if you ask them to do a composting activity, they will actually
Hmm.
transfer that understanding to this activity.
True,
Now,
true.
you were suggesting that one activity would be to trace the journey of food from seed to their table,
Hmm. Hmm.
right? So
Hmm.
maybe we can quickly think of one way that you think teachers could do this. Maybe you could suggest one way by which teachers could do it, Santosh. Some sort of an
Actually,
activity.
that
Yeah,
like we were discussing the other day, not all of us, all schools have an access to a garden or even a bare patch of soil. In cities, it's difficult. So one thing that can be done, even for this food from the journey of how you produce food from seed to the table, uh, is to even doing it in grow bags or
uh,
have pots,
hmm,
and ask children to bring their own pots and get them to sow something, and put them where there is sunlight and plan this activity, and also explain how that you can use that actually to even explain how different crops have different durations, like coriander, short duration crops, and also you can probably even get them to uh, get get their organic waste from their homes in plastic covers or something. Set up a small pot based composting system. You get ready made units which you are aware of, right? So
hmm.
that can be uh,
One
a
way of doing it.
good
Yeah,
way of doing it, because children will enjoy. And as we all know, terrace gardens are, so many people are now growing so much in terrace gardens. So it's
yeah,
not that you have to have access to
yeah,
a
yeah,
patch of soil. It can be
yeah.
done even in yeah.
Also, one thing I was thinking about was, even in rural areas, I remember in one of the villages where we used to work, where you and I used to go outside Rishi Valley School, we had
Mm-hmm.
worked with the primary and middle school headmaster, who was very who was who was extremely enterprising in a sense. And even though these were children from farming communities who were very familiar with how to grow vegetables and crops,
Mm-hmm.
but they set up a small kitchen garden in the school, and they harvested the vegetables from that kitchen garden for their midday meal.
I mean, yeah, that would be, oh, that
That
would be
is an
amazing.
incredible, because going from seed to the table, they actually saw it because they did some composting in school. They also got some of the manure from their homes. So whether it's
Mm.
an urban or rural environment, this kind of tracing from seed to table, it's not a difficult thing, because it can also be done over the year.
Yeah, yeah.
And children can actually see, and this again builds up that respect for farming, because end of the day in farming, you're doing, you're a very keen observer. Every farmer is a keen observer. They're experimenting because they're
Yes.
trying new ways of growing something. If something doesn't grow properly, they experiment with different cultivation practices, and they draw
Mm.
inferences from their observation, based on which they design how to crop and manure the next time.
Yeah,
So
can't alter their approach.
all
Yeah.
that. So there is that whole connection, and by having children trace from seed to table, you actually understand. You're actually drawing these wonderful linkages across a grade, across concepts in a grade. And Santosh, there was one such an interesting story in the third standard EVS textbook. It was about a
Mm.
bajra seed's journey from seed to the plate,
Mm.
and actually, sorry, it was grade five. Yeah, it was grade five EVS textbook, NCRT,
Right.
2024, 2025. And the Bajra seed is telling its story from seed to plate.
Mm.
Okay. So it's just, and that kind of learning, if you do these kinds of activities, you can do it for EVS in the lower grades. And as children come up to the higher grades, the concepts they're learning in class can be built into these activities. So the activity can be made less complex or more complex, depending
Mm.
upon,
Mm.
and it's a great way. So you can do the same activity in grade 3, grade 4, grade
Yeah,
5,
yeah.
and in grade 7 and grade 8, and connect their concepts, right? So one thing also, Santosh, was that, as part of your, and we've talked so much about, the concepts in the textbook that can be linked. We've talked about practice of composting and all of that. There's one thing where you talk about, which is not something we discuss in science often, which is, you say that, when the children shared their impressions, you asked them for their feelings about soil. And based on their responses, you also suggest that maybe teachers can invite students to, identify poems and songs about soil, mud, earth in various languages. What is the role of feelings in science learning? What do you think?
I think we have, how do I express that? You know, but like one thing I told class seven children because they could relate much more to it. They've already had a spring understanding of Hindi a little bit. I don't know
Yeah.
if it connects to the feeling, but the thing is that that famous song of Kabir,
Mm.
uh, I used that poem when we were talking about composting and
Yeah.
humus.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
So in that there is a line, right? एक दिन ऐसा आएगा मैं रूंधूंगी तू ही. Is
Yeah.
telling the potter
Yeah. Yeah.
basically that mud is telling the potter. Potter stands for humanity actually, right? That now you're working on me, but ultimately there comes a day then when I'll work on you. So all of us finally get worked on by microorganisms and become a part of the great grand cycles of the spectacle of life. So that when I use that poem, that's poem is highly philosophical, of course, but to
Yeah.
actually say that humus is in a way what is being told to you in what is being sung in Mati Kahe,
Mm.
so we are all part of that. And then when that connection, they were all amazed at that interpretation of Kabir's poem to explain humus or composting, you know. But feelings, I mean, again, it's each one responds to the happenings in during land care or gardening activity in their own way because they come from different backgrounds. But you see that clear difference. We both saw, right, that when it's the rural children involved, it's a much more, there is much more of a, I don't know what's the word, rapport, or connect
Mm,
with the
mm,
things,
mm,
the activities that we were doing. Whereas the children from urban backgrounds, they had their own approach, but it took them a little more time. And
mm.
I sense that even in here in school, right now in Valley School,
Yeah.
where we did something with manure, and some of these children, something clicked in them. So 3 months down the line, they came and asked me about certain things about composting. So
Mm,
the connect can happen later, and it can
mm.
also happen
I think we, I think we've just lost Santosh for a bit, but he will join us shortly, and we'll just wait for him for a little bit. But meanwhile, to just continue the conversation, one of the things about feelings also, and both Santosh and I have experienced it in our own work as well. When we talk about feelings in science, when children, when we create activities that allow them to express their feelings, we're also building affective skills in children, right? Which is that they learn to care, because only when you feel for something, only when your emotion is involved, do you learn to care, right? So, and that is one of the things in also that the NCF or the NEP talks about building scientific temper in children. And unless feelings are, unless we bring this understanding of, as human beings, we respond to our environment through feelings, right? And the skills of care, empathy, all that is built on how we feel about our environment. And these are skills that can be built. So feelings are a very, so we both have seen in our work that, when we engage particularly with middle school and pre-primary children, so Santosh, I was just continuing about our work where we've seen how when you tap in, when you encourage children to express their feelings, you're actually building a care for their for the environment, no? Because there is an empathy that is,
mm,
no, for the environment.
yeah, the
And
empathy factor comes in. Yes.
yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so that is, but that's beautiful what you said about Mati Kahe. So one, I
Mm,
think we're sort of very close to the end of our conversation. So one last question for both of us to reflect on, I think, is that in your article towards the closing end, you say that the teacher is a learner too, no? And
yeah,
I know
yeah.
all teachers who are in our audience, I'm sure appreciate that, and they must have experienced it so many times. And I can't imagine anyone not agreeing with us on this, that the teacher is a learner too. So both of us wrote these articles about 6 years ago. But you continue to be in teaching, you continue to teach children. So, some of the main learnings that you had from the approach that you used, are any new insights, where you have collaborated with children to develop your pedagogy? Any new insights now that you're working with children on the land, something that teachers can take away, something from your experience? In closing, if there is
Uh,
anything that you share.
yeah. Actually, what has happened is, like we have to be sensitive to the pulse of the children. So there are days when they actually don't want to do anything. I don't know. If something happens in the class. Maybe they had a maths class before land care. you know. So you have to be alive to that pulse, and because and it's all very how you respond to their feelings or their willingness to do things that day. You need to be in touch with them, and if you're once you once they get familiar with you, they'll openly express that we don't want to do any digging today.
Yeah.
We don't want to do
Yeah.
anything of that sort today.
Yeah.
So then you
Yeah.
take them. That's when these are the learnings actually to tinker your approach and your interactions by being alive to what they feel on that particular day, or take some cues from how your class fared with the earlier batch. So then the next batch you can probably avoid that mistake. I don't have any specific things. So like that, when that happens, what I do is I take them on a walk. They love to see turtles in an open well. So that's also again connecting to the land only, not
Yeah.
soil specifically, but then and
Yeah.
then
Yeah.
and then go walking along the stream.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
they sometimes like to, if it is not tamarind season, go and pluck tamarinds
Yeah. Yeah.
and climb trees.
Yeah. Yeah.
So sometimes you have to digress from what your actually your objective is and move away from that just to come
Yeah.
back again. That
Yeah.
is something that I do here. Uh,
Yeah.
but apart from that, of course, like you learn a lot from. I don't know how to put it in words, when they come to you with a plan, or when they come to you with something they observed and they want to show it to you. Those are all very what do you say,
Precious, precious
uh,
moments, actually.
touch precious
Yeah.
moments. So there are such precious moments with some children, some
Yeah.
batches.
Yeah.
So that happens. Yeah.
Also, I think just from in, I was just also reflecting on my own experience, and now I work sporadically with children. But one of the things is that how with each as teachers to be one, as you say, engage children and meet them where they are. I mean, there is a reality that there's curriculum to be done, dealt with, syllabus to be finished. There is that reality, but to also
Yeah.
be able to sort of, like you said. Um, place the children at the center of the learning. So then as teachers, can we innovate? Like for instance, if we are teaching soil, for instance, since we're talking about soil, then can we, if either they are tired, or as a class there is distraction, right? So are there activities
Mm.
that we can think of, or are there ways that we can engage children through hands-on work? I mean, through like really like what you said about working with the soil, working on the land. Can we do that? Because that brings them back, because that brings a certain kind of a connection to them. But as teachers, for us also to have all of this with us, to anticipate these multiple possibilities that you may face in a classroom, and to be open to
To be open
to
is the key
uh,
thing.
to be to be resourceful and open and flexible in our approach, which may not be easy in many situations. If, for instance, you're the only teacher, like for instance, many government schools, you may have only one teacher teaching three classes. There'll be one science teacher. So then, what are some ways by which we can, so as teachers, to really think about having a repository of resources with us, to dip into when we are faced with these kind of situations, I think. But yeah, I mean, the best way to do this, of course, is to learn with each class that one teaches, to be open and see what we can learn from each class, from the students and how they respond and their questions.
It looks like, hmm, hmm.
And also
No, it
more
looks
than
like
their,
each class has a
yeah,
character. So you
yeah,
need to be alive to that and
yeah, yeah.
respond.
And to be open, and to also be open about accepting that you don't know something and that you'll work with them on it. I think
Yeah,
those are some
actually,
things which,
they appreciate that when you say there are
yeah,
certain things
yeah,
that you don't know.
yeah,
Nature
yeah,
processes are
yeah,
very complex.
yeah,
Yeah, some of them raise their eyebrows. And
yeah, yeah, that's true, that's true. So I'm sure we could keep continuing this conversation, but Santosh and everyone else who joined us today, thank you so much for being part of this conversation. If you have any questions for Santosh or me that did not get addressed today, please send them to us at iwonder@apu.edu.in. We will do our best to answer them. And we hope to see you again in iWonder's next webinar on February 12th, 2025 at 4:30 p.m. And for all those who've not subscribed to iWonder yet, We hope you do so now. Thank you and best wishes for the new year. Thank you.